I'm sure many of you have seen the new rulebook that was released for Trench Crusade version 1.0. I have found, while looking through it, that there is a new timeline to Trench Crusade. So here I've decided to once and for all make a video about a brief and incomplete timeline of Trench Crusade. Now I'm sure that there will be more timelines to come, with more details in, and I'll probably make updates to this video. But for 1.0 of the game, which is obviously a huge deal, I'll be looking at the 1.0 version of the timeline for Trench Crusade, and all the new features it has, and the new events it covers. So, without further ado, welcome to the timeline of Trench Crusade. 1072. Strange disturbances in the heavens, blood-colored comets, trembling stars, and eclipses that linger for hours. These events are widely interpreted as a sign that God's ordained order is beginning to fracture. Across Europe and the Near East, prophets issue conflicting visions, while learned clergy whisper fearfully of a cosmic disruption that may threaten creation itself. Amid this spiritual unease, heretical cults begin to multiply. In abandoned monasteries and remote borderlands, preaching blasphemous miracles and dark revelations. In response, the newly formed Order of the Knights Templar emerges with a fierce resolve, fixated on reclaiming the Holy Land. The Templars set their sights on Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, believing their mission divinely mandated and unaware of the catastrophe their actions will one day unleash. 1099. The First Crusade storms Jerusalem in a brutal holy war, culminating in the Templars performing the unthinkable, the act of ultimate heresy. Driven by misguided zeal or by darker influences they scarcely understand, they breach forbidden rituals meant never to be invoked by mortal hands. In that moment, the very fabric of reality rends. A gate of hell erupts upon the Temple Mount, consuming the city in apocalyptic fire. Jerusalem is obliterated and replaced by a pulsing wound in the world from which infernal energies pour without restraint. 2 years later, in 1101, Hell's breach expands. Demonic armies of the Third Circle spill into the Levant with unstoppable momentum. The year becomes known as the Year of Three Battles, each a catastrophic defeat for humanity. Heretic forces, mortals corrupted by infernal promises, march in lockstep with abominations birthed from hell, overwhelming the last Crusader garrisons. By the year's end, the entire Levant is lost, drowned beneath a tide of unholy conquest. In 1102, with Jerusalem gone and the Levant collapsing, the ancient city of Antioch becomes the final bastion of organized resistance. Engineers, monks, and soldiers, and refugees pour into the city, transforming it into an immense fortress. Walls are reinforced with blessed stone, reliquaries are embedded into ramparts, and the city's bishops rally all remaining crusaders to its defense. Antioch becomes both symbol and shield, the lone bright flame holding back Hell's advance. Amid the growing infernal dominion, a monstrous figure rises in 1106. Kobar, whose cruelty becomes legendary. Harnessing the authority granted by Hell's nobles, he crowns himself the first tyrant of the 66, ruling over a confederation of demonic fiefdoms. Kobar's regime brings systemic corruption, terror, and forced indoctrination across the conquered territories. His ascent marks the solidification of Hell's political power on Earth. In response to the growing infernal threat, Islamic realms rally behind a unified banner, the Great Sultanate of the invincible iron wall of the two horns that pierce the sky. In 1109, this mighty state forms over decades as rival factions recognize the necessity of survival through unity. Ancient legends of the Iron Wall of Iskander, once mythic defenses against Gog and Magog, re-emerge in the physical world. The wall is rediscovered, rebuilt, and reinforced with divine metallurgy, forming a colossal bulwark that prevents heretic incursions from sweeping into the heart of the Islamic world. In 1117, the 17 martyrs, renowned devotees and miracle workers, embark on a perilous mission into Hell's domain, believing that even the damned may yet be converted to God's grace. Their quest is quickly met with treachery. Captured by demonic lords, they are tortured in ways meant to transcend death itself. Their souls and bodies are fused into white-hot altars that eternally burn, monuments of agony used by heretics as both warning and a blasphemous idol. In 1165, the Old Man of the Mountain and his Hashashins refuse to yield their mountain fortress of Alamut, even as heretic armies surround them, decade after decade. Despite relentless assault, Alamut endures, its steep cliffs, hidden tunnels, and assassins' mastery proving insurmountable. Stories spread of a spectral defender and divine illusions aiding the Hashashins, and the fortress takes on a mythic status, a thorn in the side of hell that cannot be plucked. 1215 to 1306. A doctrinal dispute fractures the church into three rival branches, each convinced that the others harbour subtle forms of heresy. The resulting wars of Triclavianism consume Europe for nearly a century. While the faithful slaughter each other in God's name, heretic domains expand with alarming speed. Whole regions fall to infernal influence simply because no one remains to defend them. By the end of the conflict, millions are dead, and the church is spiritually and politically shattered. In 1312, in the aftermath of chaos, the church discovers a new weapon against the heretics, the communicants. These warriors, created through sacred rites that border on mystical transfiguration, are able to channel divine forces directly into battle. Their arrival stabilizes the front lines, halting Hell's momentum. Though few in number and costly to create, the communicants become living anchors of holy power across the war-torn world. In 1346 and 1353, Beelzebub, one of Hell's greatest princes, unleashes the Black Grail, an abominable plague that infects entire nations. Victims are twisted into grotesque metastatic vessels, their bodies reshaped into living repositories for demonic larvae. The corpse wars erupt as millions transform into shambling hosts of infernal corruption. Kingdoms collapse under the sheer biological horror of the plague, reshaping Europe into a wasteland of disease and despair. In 1429, Saint Jeanne d'Arc, guided by visions and divine radiance, leads miraculous campaigns across Europe. Her presence alone weakens the Black Grail's corruption, allowing armies to reclaim vast territories. Through a series of brilliant victories, she purges the plague from mainland Europe, restoring hope to a continent drowning in darkness. Her feats become legendary, her sanctity unquestioned. In 1477, the city of Argos, long believed blessed and protected by divine grace, is suddenly and mysteriously taken by God. Its disappearance is absolute. Buildings, people, archives, everything. Clergy interpret this event in contradictory ways, some as punishment, others as mercy. Regardless, Argos becomes a ghostly absence in the map, a reminder that even the faithful may be swept away by forces beyond mortal comprehension. In 1503, war prophet Angelos, guided by visions granted by Saint Eligius, uncovers the divine formula for forging orichalcum steel, though prohibitively expensive. This metal possesses extraordinary defensive properties, rendering its wearers nearly impervious to all missile damage. Its introduction marks a turning point in the war, allowing elite units to withstand infernal artillery and demonic projectiles. Orichalcum armor becomes a prized, if rare, safeguard of humanity's greatest champions. In 1545, Antioch, the fortress, symbol, and spiritual heart of resistance, is destroyed in a single night by an unknown infernal superweapon. Survivors speak of a blinding red sun, a roar that devoured sound itself, and the city collapsing into shimmering ash. The loss sends shockwaves through all Christendom. A bastion that stood for centuries is wiped from existence, proving Hell's capacity to escalate the war without limit. In 1573, after Byzantium falls to Infernal's forces, the Sacred Order of the Dragon mounts a desperate counter-offensive. With ruthless precision, they carve a scorched path of retribution through the Carpathians, impaling a reported 1,000,000 heretics across the hills of Wallachia. Though grim, their campaign halts Hell's advance. Word of the macabre displays spread across Europe, reinforcing the Order's reputation, its uncompromising defenders against the darkness. In 1588, to heal centuries of schism, the Unified Church compiles a new holy text that reconciles doctrines fractured during the Wars of Triclavianism. The syncretic Bible becomes the theological foundation of renewed unity among the faithful. On the ruins of the old city, a new fortress, New Antioch, is constructed with unprecedented engineering and divine blessing. In 1595, its walls are completed, wider and taller than any before, layered with relics and reinforced by orichalcum plates. The city becomes a principal stronghold against the heretic presence in the east, serving both as spiritual beacon and military garrison. Its power as a symbol, as the last sword and shield of Europa, was deemed too important to give up, so the Second Sword Congress of Vienna had dedicated itself to its reconstruction. And in 1595, that reconstruction was finally complete. New Antioch stood, once again, as the last bastion of the faithful in the Levant. In 1666, a devastating surprise attack occurred. The newly constructed heretic fleet seized Gibraltar. The rock is transformed into the sea fortress, a massive infernal naval base, granting Hell direct access to the Atlantic. This event triggers the Year of Six Woes. Coastal kingdoms suffer raids, merchant fleets are decimated, and Europe's strategic balance tilts dangerously in Hell's favour. In 1670, as heretic naval raids intensify, England begins constructing an enormous coastal defence on the cliffs of Dover. Carved into the chalk itself, the fortress of the White Cliffs becomes a labyrinth of artillery emplacements, sanctified chambers, and massive bastions. Its guns safeguard the channel and prevent heretic fleets from launching a full-scale invasion into England's heartlands. In 1703, in a daring covert operation, a small but highly trained order of Hebrew knights emerges from their long-hidden stronghold. Exploiting secret tunnels and ancient scripts, they infiltrate and destroy the Templar fortress at Acre. Their victory is symbolic, severing a lingering root of the act of ultimate heresy, and proving that even the most entrenched bastions of corruption can be uprooted. In 1721, New Antioch faces its third and most brutal siege, as heretic armies surround the city with infernal siege engines and demonic legions. Just as the defenders falter, a grand coalition arrives. Sultan Ibrahim's disciplined armies from the east, Tughlaq warriors from distant realms, and a papal relief fleet from the west. The combined forces shatter the siege and drive back the heretics, marking one of the rare moments of true global unity against hell. In 1789, Admiral Aminadab launches a full-scale heretic invasion of the Scottish Highlands. The rugged terrain becomes a nightmare battlefield of ambushes, scorched villages, and endless guerrilla warfare. For decades, the Scots resist with ferocity, but the population suffers immense losses as entire clans are uprooted or exterminated. The war becomes synonymous with resilience born from desperation. In 1805, High Captain Ranga commands a formidable heretic fleet that crushes England's navy in a decisive confrontation along the jagged cliffs of southern Britain. Naval cannons roar across blood-stained waters as the renowned Admiral Nelson is slain in the chaos. The defeat shakes the British Empire and exposes its coasts to heretic predation like never before. In 1807, the heretic Basilisk fleet strikes Ireland with overwhelming firepower. High King Murdoch leads a valiant but doomed resistance, falling at the Battle of Waterford. Ireland descends into a century-long guerrilla conflict as scattered clans fight a relentless insurgency against the occupying heretic forces. The island becomes a crucible of resistance. In 1866, in secret shipyards hidden beneath Gibraltar, heretic engineers, guided by the demon Marbas, construct the first modern submarines. These vessels blend stolen human innovation with infernal biomancy, granting them speed and stealth unrivaled by surface fleets. Their emergence marks a terrifying new age of naval warfare. In 1870, the heretic submarine fleet devastates global merchant shipping, sinking grain convoys and supply vessels. Nations teeter on famine as maritime trade collapses. Panic spreads across Europe and the Mediterranean as no ship seems safe from the unseen predators lurking beneath the wave. In 1872, heretic stormtroops launch a surprise assault on the Adriatic city of Rijeka, seizing it within days. The city is fortified with blood-forged walls and becomes a staging ground for Hell's armies. From Rijeka, the heretics push aggressively into the European mainland, threatening to sever trade routes and encircle key territories. After a century of guerrilla struggling, in 1892, Era at last expels its occupiers. In a daring night raid, coordinated Vienna flying columns penetrate the heretic anchorage and destroy the flagship, the Hymn of Obscenity. This symbolic victory galvanizes Europe and signals that even deeply entrenched infernal forces can be uprooted by courage and cunning. In 1894, one of the greatest tragedies in history occurs. 3 legendary death commandos, Cain, Barabbas, and Haman, execute a perfectly synchronized triple assassination, killing the Supreme Pontiff, the High Prophetess Aelia, and the Holy Roman Emperor. Their deaths plunged the faithful into chaos. In the same hour, Hell's Seventh Circle launches a massive mechanized assault across the Levant and Europe, led by demonic nobles and backed by terrifying new tank legions. The world teeters on collapse. In 1899, recognizing that Earth alone may not hold the means to defeat Hell, the Church initiates its space program. Using experimental rocketry and divine mathematical principles, engineers begin reaching beyond the atmosphere. The supply fleet of New Antioch is ambushed and annihilated by heretic warships in 1905. Debris washes ashore along the Levantine coast, forming the grotesque Carcass Front, a stretch of beach choked with wreckage and corpses and demonic parasites. Achish, Lord of the 66, seizes the moment to launch the 8th siege of New Antioch, while concurrently striking the Iron Sultanate to divide the faithful. The Duke of New Antioch falls, but a hastily assembled relief force ultimately repels the heretic armies in a hard-fought victory. In 1907, Britain completes construction of an unprecedented mobile citadel, the moving fortress of Britannia. Built on Titanic propellers and powered by consecrated engines, the fortress patrols the coastline as a roving bastion of firepower. Its mobility allows Britain to repel heretic landings and heretic naval forces with unparalleled force, restoring some measure of security to the embattled island. In 1910, heretic artillery pounds Cordoba into rubble in an attempt to breach the gateway of Hispania. The fighting devolves into horrifying close quarters, slaughter amidst the shattered ruins. Despite suffering immense casualties, the defenders prevent the heretics from advancing deeper into Spain. The battle becomes a grim testament to the stubborn endurance of the faithful. Now, the year is 1914, and on the eve of a new century of war, both the faithful and the heretics prepare for massive offences. Skirmishes multiply across the scarred expanse of no man's land. Vast trenches, corpse fields, relic-haunted wastelands, and shattered citadels. Raids, assassinations, and relic expeditions intensify as each side fights for strategic advantages, holy artifacts, or demonic engines of power. A great storm of war looms, and the world holds its breath. So that is the new and improved, brief and incomplete timeline of Trench Crusade. There has been so much new lore added here, I thought it was brilliant when I first read it, and knew I had to make a video on it. Now, I'm not sure how many of you remember the original timeline for Trench Crusade, but there are a number of pieces here that were not included. The first being literally the first, the thing in 1072, the Celestial Warnings on the Rise of Heresy. This originally was not included, and the timeline had begun with 1099 and the fall of Jerusalem and the Act of Ultimate Heresy. So having a date before that was really interesting, and it talking about Celestial Warnings means that things have been going wrong for a bit longer than we thought. That'll be interesting to get an expansion on, if we can. The mention of the creation of the first communicants, that's new, I believe. And though we do know a lot about communicants, it's interesting that the first one turned up all the way back in 1312. So that's a nice little lore expansion. Another new addition to the timeline is the Third Siege of New Antioch. This was not mentioned at all in the original timeline, and it was only revealed in the original that there were 8 sieges of New Antioch by the current day. So the third one happening a century and a bit before the 8th one means that they were going through it for those years. There's at least 5 attacks within that century. and these attacks are huge in the lore. I really want a story about at least one of the sieges of New Antioch. But the most interesting thing that this one expands on is the fact that the Sultanate and the Tughlaq warriors came to help. These are not Christian forces, obviously, and they came to help New Antioch and lift the siege. This is a moment of true global unity against hell, as it says. So that's a really interesting expansion to have. And that was one of the things I was most excited about because I always want to hear more about it. And directly after that, another expansion is the Highlands Invasion. This is the first mention of Scotland in the Trench Crusade lore. So that's interesting. They also got a bit of the Ireland treatment, getting invaded and having to do guerrilla warfare and a century or so of fighting off the evil. But they managed to it, and that's great. I hope we get more on that eventually. Maybe a good lore drop like we got for Era. That'd be very greatly appreciated. And the next change is, in fact, the lore drop of Era. That wasn't there in the original. Well, kinda. It wasn't expanded to at this point, but since we got the lore drop, and then since Thomas gave me his notes, we have learned a lot about Era's invasion, which will be greatly interesting to see even more about, because I can't get enough of my homeland. The next one is also Era. In 1892, Era is liberated. This is obviously new because the lore wasn't there originally when the first timeline came out. So that's great. The next change is directly after that. The Carcass Front. I believe this is basically... And the 8th Siege of New Antioch. I believe this is basically set up for terrain and for areas for the battles to canonically happen when you're playing Trench Crusade. It's a great little lore insert and would be very fun to play and mess around with. So if you're making your terrain, make it on the Carcass Front. Make it all ship ruins. That'd be very interesting. I think it'd be very fun. And from there we get to the present day of Trench Crusade. That is the new brief and incomplete timeline. The old brief and incomplete timeline, but not so brief and not so incomplete. Hopefully this gets more and more expansion on. And of course there is some other things occurring within this timeline that we don't know about. Mysteries occurring within the timeline itself, such as who created the first communicants, and why is their name etched from history. So, I hope you have enjoyed this new look at the new and improved brief and incomplete timeline of Trench Crusade. I hope there is more lore to come in the future, because as they move into making plastic models and releasing the 1.0 of the game and the book coming out, which sadly I will not be getting because I did not have money at the time the Kickstarter was happening and could not get the book or pledge to get the book, so I might be a bit behind on the lore unless any of you are friendly enough to share any lore that you receive out of the book with me. That would be greatly appreciated. I also hopefully can maybe ask Thomas if he can lend me that lore, because I don't want to be too behind all the other YouTubers here with their lore reveals, because I assume they all have the book or will be getting the book. Yeah, perks of being a broke college student. It's great. I really, really like the timeline of Trench Crusade, and I think everything here has genuinely just made it better. I think this will be a huge expansion upon the lore, and everything we hear in this will be touched upon hopefully soon, and we can get a more clear look at the timeline, and maybe a more in-depth look at certain interesting bits like the sieges of Cordoba, Vieja, and of course New Antioch itself. And maybe some more mysteries of the Trench Crusade map will be revealed by this. Like it mentions in this that the most of mainland Europe, as it mentioned in the original, was taken over during the Corps Wars. Will we see what the map looked like during that? I do hope we get multiple maps. It would be a great expansion if we could see what the world looked like at different times. Just as you can look up a map of 1914 in our world, maybe you can look up a map of 1340s in theirs and see what the spread of the Black Grail did to Europe. Or when the Free State of Prussia emerges, or where it is on the map. Why was it hidden? Fiona Paint had a good theory about that. It's kingdom propaganda. And I would trust a British person to do that. So, yeah. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I greatly enjoyed making it. Timelines are always some of the most fun I have with lore. And hopefully I will see you soon for the next one. Though these videos, as you know, are becoming less and less frequent as less and less lore is released. But I will hopefully be back to a good upload schedule, maybe around Christmas when I get some time off college. Thank you for watching, and I will see all you guys in the next one.